So we've got Ludwig in Sweden. How are you? Or I think we do. Ludwig?
Ludwig, are you there? Well, I can talk about this
a
little bit.
We'll go ahead and through the Christian detector while we get that set up.
Yeah, so we talked about the Christian detector throughout history. Well, today we might actually use it to expose demagogue politicians, like a lot of folks claim to believe in God. We'll be right to you, Ludwig.
Okay.
We might expose them as what they are, as they're sort of leading people on, perhaps. As Matt alluded to, if we were to take one of these Christian detectors into a church, we might discover that, hey, there's not many Christians in here, and hey, the minister isn't Christian. We actually have the Clergy Project helping people who are in the clergy come out as atheists or non-believers and find other roles where they don't have to. They don't have to lie, those sorts of things. And if we were to scan this across the United States, we might discover, well, maybe the Fred Phelps family is the only true Christians there, and nobody else really qualifies or something.
They're certainly convinced that that's the case.
They're certainly right. And I think Christianity would lose much of its power because it would bring home to the fact that there are many different versions of Christianity, and they all can't be right. And all of these things that I think atheists see pretty easily. Abroad, if we were to see, ISIS or the Taliban have this Christian detector, there might be some horrible consequences for folks in Syria or folks in countries that have mixed religions.
And the people sneaking over to give away Bibles in China and other countries where it's not permitted
there you go.
would be exposed at the gate.
There you go.
At least turn around and go back. Take your useless book that, if you want to show up with food and say you're giving away food, do that, but you don't have to attach a Bible to every sandwich you hang out.
Right. So the idea of a Christian detector is kind of a pipe dream. Cruz and Bush are just using the idea, I think, to pander to their base. And for those Christians in the audience, would you pass? Would you be a true Christian or not?
Go ahead. The thing that got me most about this, so Jeb Bush was actually asked, how would you go about actually telling who's a Christian and who's not? And he oh shucks, I think you can tell. It's funny to watch his body language as he's kind of dead. Well, I think you can tell this. And talk about politicians not answering a question. The truth is, until you can actually read minds, you have no way of doing this. Doctrinally, if any of these politicians that are claiming they can tell who's a Christian or not, if any of them were quote unquote true Christians, and I'm putting on my no true Christian, not quite a fallacy hat, at least doctrinally, God is the only one who can tell who is or isn't a Christian. It's entirely up to him. He's the only one in their doctrine who can actually know the mind. And they would all identify this because they know there are non-Christians in their church. They know that Christians throughout the world have been exposed as not good enough Christians or into various scandals or other stuff. This idea that we could actually tell who is or isn't a Christian is not only nonsense, it is bigoted and unfucking constitutional. Yep. You don't get to give me your cold, your hungry Christians only. That's not what we're about.
Yeah.
Religious freedom.
We're a country of immigrants.
Is right. In there. And we already, I remember when Obama was running for office the first time, and there were people like, oh my gosh, he's a Muslim. Oh my gosh, he's a Muslim. And on CNN, I forgot her, Ms. Brown, I've forgotten her first name, pointed out he's not actually a Muslim, but so what if he was? There's no constitutional prohibition. We have religious freedom here. And as a Muslim, he could run for and win the presidency and serve that way. So to hear these pandering asshats turn away needy people who are trying to escape atrocities, and instead of saying what perhaps their actual motivations are, just say, oh, well, we'll take the Christian ones. Well, screw you, buddy. You should take the atheist ones too, and the Hindus and the Muslims and the Scientologists, if there are any coming from Syria. Because I think that what happened here is they realized that as they started making pronouncements about the danger of all the terrorists who are going to sneak over with the refugees, where they've blown up the numbers to ridiculous proportions under any reasonable statistical model, that they realized, hey, this isn't selling as well. It kind of makes us look a little fear-mongery. So instead, we'll pander to the religious base and say that we'll happily take the Christians. Well, bite me. Personally, I'd like to bag up all of the Christians like you who aren't in favor of religious freedom and ship your ass to Syria. But I don't get to decide who lives in the United States, and neither do you. And on that note, we'll go to Ludvig in Sweden, who doesn't live in the United States and is probably happy about it.
Hey, welcome.
Hello?
Yeah, you there? Thanks. Thanks for waiting.
Ah, cool. Thanks for having me. I was just wondering about, like, how do you guys believe in objective morality?
Depending on the definition, yes, I do.
I'm going to let you take that.
Yeah, Don doesn't want to go near it. So my view on this is that provided you begin with a definition of something along the lines of well-being, Sam Harris has presented it that way, I did as well in a number of talks, that there are objective truths to be discovered. As physical beings in a physical universe, the consequences of my actions are dictated by physical laws, and their impact on others is also dictated by physical laws, and so there are objective truths to be discovered. The primary objection that people launch to this version is, yes, but why should we care about well-being? You haven't given me any reason why we should care about that. And my answer is, I don't give a rat's ass. I really don't, because we do care about that. And saying, why should we care about it, is basically a big red herring. It's a way of avoiding the actual issue. The people who don't care about that tend to remove themselves from the gene pool or remove themselves from society. And if you don't think that that is what counts as morality, then let's set aside the label and give it another label and actually talk about the substance of the position rather than focusing on the label.
All right. So it's a form of utilitarianism.
It is a form of utilitarianism. It's a kind of a pragmatic, it's a recognition that we make decisions, okay? We evaluate things. So in any given situation, there is a finite set of actions that I could take. And some of these actions will have terrible consequences, and some of them will have relatively neutral consequences, and some of them will have good consequences, both for myself and for other people. And the only thing that we need to have is the ability to compare those consequences to figure out what set of one or more actions represent the pinnacle for that particular situation. So one point of confusion, which I'll clear up real quickly, when I talk about objective morality, I am not talking about universal moral absolutes. My morality is still a situational morality, because I recognize that in this situation, a particular action would be moral, and in a different situation, that action might be immoral. For example, after Hurricane Katrina, there were people who were, stealing supplies from stores. Well, if you stole a supply from a store when there wasn't this crisis going on, it would absolutely be immoral, or it would be viewed as immoral, generally speaking. I guess I should avoid the absolute thing, but I'm still talking about within the situation. When you do it after Katrina, all of a sudden it doesn't have the same moral tag attached to it. As a matter of fact, it may be the most moral thing you can do is to take supplies that were going to go to waste anyway, even if they belong to somebody else, to help people survive, to rebuild that community.
Okay. What about Don? Do you have a similar view? Or?
Oh, I would agree with that. If you want to talk about an objective morality, it's where would that come from? There is no sort of objective perspective on the universe. Since we don't believe in a God, where would that come from? So I don't,
Exactly.
So that's kind of where what I would add.
And my position is that the only objective standard that I am aware of, that I can appeal to, that other people on the planet happen to agree with, are the physical facts about reality. When I say that something, when it's objective, I mean it is not subjective. It means that it's not just a matter of personal opinion for an individual. It is an assessment of the consequences of actions, and those things are dictated by the laws of the universe.
I don't know if you can say that there is any like objective facts about reality, because
there are no objective facts
perceived by a subject. So
okay, so I wholeheartedly reject that idea, because basically what that is, it denies that there's any shared reality. It devolves into solipsism. I have 3 cameras sitting in front of me right now. That's an objective fact about reality that we can investigate not only with my own subjective senses, but other people's. And if the response is that I only have access to other people's opinions because that comes through my senses as well, now you're into the, you're basically just denying that there's anything about reality. And
no.
Okay.
Not denying, just saying that it's not the same thing as denying it, because I'm basically saying that denying it would it's basically saying that you can't perceive the absolute reality.
I don't
care. It's not the same as
so,
denying that it exists.
So I don't see any path to confirming that the reality I experience is the absolute reality.
Exactly.
Okay, this is what I'm saying. I don't see any solution to the problem of hard solipsism. I don't have any way to show that I'm not a brain in a vat. I don't have any way to show that I'm not living in the matrix. But I am stuck dealing with the reality I experience, whether it's the ultimate reality or not. And if you and I are in agreement that we're both experiencing this reality, then it is objective within that scope. This idea that objectivity only applies if there is access to absolute truth is just bizarre to me, because you could be a figment of my imagination, or at least I can't show you're not. But I have no reason to think that that is the case, and I still have to operate as if you're not, because acting as if you are a figment of my imagination has consequences.
Okay, yeah, true. But that was a bit of a sidetrack. I basically wanted to call just because I'm a theist and I believe that objective morality cannot exist without a God. So basically, I just wanted to hear.
So how can it exist with a God? Because if there's a God who is the arbiter of what's moral or not, can he change his mind about what's moral?
My position is not. It's more. It's more that I believe that objective morality exists, and I believe that it cannot exist without a God. So therefore,
okay, I understand that's what you think. I'm asking you, how can it exist with a God?
Yeah, but I don't have to account for that because.
Well, if you're not interested in accounting for what you actually believe, then I'm not interested in continuing the discussion, because that's what you're doing, is avoiding it. You think that there's an objective morality, and you think that this can only come about if there is a God. Now, you haven't demonstrated that it can only come about through God. You've just asserted it, and you have not demonstrated that it's possible for it to come about with a God.
But listen, if objective morality exists, and I can demonstrate that it cannot exist within a world without God.
Yes, but you haven't done either of those things.
No, I know. So basically, I think you provided an account for, like you made a reasonable argument, and so
I don't
know what I think.
Okay. Hey, not knowing what you think now and continuing to evaluate it, that's pretty good. The reason I was asking the questions is because I've had this conversation a lot, and the objections that theists tend to launch against a non-theistic universe with respect to morality are not in any way solved by a theistic morality. Because, so their view is there is an objective morality, which they can't demonstrate, but they're convinced. Okay, cool. But the second part of the view is that there can only be an objective morality if there's a God. Now, in order for that to be true, it must be true that objective morality exists, which they haven't demonstrated, cannot exist without a God, and it must also be demonstrated that it can exist with a God. And this is why when we talk about God models, if, hey, is slavery immoral? Well, there are religions that were okay with slavery, including Christianity and the Bible. But let's just go to an outrageous example. It would be immoral, I think, for Don to lop off my head in the middle of the show. I think almost everybody on the planet, almost, would agree that that would be viewed as immoral. If there is a God who is the arbiter of what's moral, then that God either can say, lopping off Matt's head is moral, or he can't say that. And this is where we get to the Euthyphro dilemma. Is something moral because God says so, or does God say so because it's already moral? If something's only moral because God says so, then God could say that lopping off my head is moral, and it would be the case. He could, it's moral for you to kill your kids, it's moral for you to rape people, and that would actually be the case. Almost everybody objects that, the simplistic divine command theory. So instead, the other option is that God says that it's moral because it is. And if it's moral, then it's not tied to what God says.
Then you don't need God.
Then you don't need God, and you can discover the truth about morality, irrespective of whether God exists. But anyway, we've got a couple of theist callers we want to try to get to here before we close out. I appreciate the call. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.